Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of cyBARR Chats. I'm Michelle Smith, Director of Marketing, and today I'm very excited to be speaking with Julie Mungai. Julie is a senior consultant here at BARR with 5 years experience in IT auditing. And today we're going to be discussing the topic of conducting virtual audits and general tips for virtual meetings. So Julie, I will start off with our first question. As you know, client walkthroughs are an important part of an audit process. Due to COVID-19, BARR ended travel to client sites until our associates and our clients feel that their safety is guaranteed. So now that all audits are conducted remotely, how do you ensure that you're getting all the details and information needed from a walkthrough when it's done via video versus on site?
That's a great question, Michelle. I like to think of it in 3 steps. The first one is to think of it as like survival sprints. So you don't want to schedule a 4-hour meeting over WebEx or over Hangouts or Zoom and then have the other party completely bored and completely disinterested because it's just too much and too long of a period to pay attention. And then the second thing that I think is great to have is to always double down on the digital resources you have. So if you are scheduling a meeting, make use of some of the recording features that some of the tools have, whether it be a Zoom meeting. Always record it just to make sure that if something happens to pass you by and you didn't really pay attention, you can always go back to the recording and listen to it like play by play. And then lastly, this goes for all engagements, whether it's done via video or not. I think planning is the key to a successful walkthrough. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. So spend that additional 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even an hour the day before to come up with a really detailed agenda. Focus on areas that you want to hit in the meeting. And then always recognize that there might be topics that you can't cover. And always be ready to send an action items email or a summary email to cover items that you may have missed.
So how do you prepare differently for a remote audit versus on-site engagements?
I mean, let's be honest, virtual meetings are a little bit stale, right? They're not as interesting as sitting in a room directly from the person you're hoping to engage with. So what I like to do is with regards to like the team engagements and people that I work with, I like to think of collaboration tools that we need to maybe like hone into or think about to help foster a team environment where everyone is as engaged in a meeting, for instance. So that could be a G Sheet agenda so everyone can put in their notes together simultaneously. And I also like to include everyone. And the key to any virtual meeting is to communicate. Over communication is my goal when it comes to a virtual team or walkthrough. So over communicate, send emails, because at the end of the day, you don't have the luxury of having that person next door, like compared to like an on-site meeting where if I miss this, I can pop into your office and get the missing details that I needed. But from a client perspective, the way I prepare differently is I like to narrow down my thoughts, meaning I want to know the key message that I want to communicate. I want to know who my audience is, and I want to know what the goal of the meeting is. Also, an important thing to think about is the communication style. Given that it is a remote site visit, think about ways to get them excited. It could be an icebreaker. It could be a short little activity of like ways for you to get to know each other. But basically for a remote site visit versus an on-site visit, I think the key to that is getting the client engaged and knowing exactly what your audience expects and what your goal is for that meeting.
And speaking of communication, and you kind of touched on this in this last question, how do you ensure you're communicating effectively without those benefits of in-person or nonverbal communication?
As I mentioned before, it is a bit challenging to communicate in the remote world. So it's even more critical to stay connected, whether it is with your teammates, whether it is with the client. And one of the benefits that I think that has come out of all this COVID-19 phase, so to say, is there have been like growth of many collaboration tools. So if there's, like I said earlier, if there's a need for me to like do a real-time check-in on the client, I can do that through a direct message or even through chat rooms. One thing that I especially love about BARR is for some of our clients that utilize Slack, we can essentially create a chat room to where we can Slack them anytime we need anything from them. They can Slack us anytime they need feedback or if they have questions on anything. So I truly appreciate the enormous amounts of collaboration tools that have come out. As of course, with the issue of security, we are using Zoom and Slack. So those are some of the collaboration tools that I use.
So what advice do you have for someone leading their first virtual meeting?
I'm probably going to say this throughout this interview, but prep work. If you
Repetition is
plan,
great.
if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So if it is your first walkthrough, you have to be cognizant of the fact that this is something you've never done before. There might be curveballs. So what you need to do is, or what I like to do or encourage some of like the first year staff is spend that time, that front end time to plan through areas or topics that you're wanting to discuss. And even like outside of prep work, if you're planning to lead a first time walkthrough, what I find was completely beneficial for me once I started this career is the fact that I had the support of my team. So if you're leading your first walkthrough, I would suggest you stay close connected to your partners, to your directors, to your managers and seniors, because they will kind of lead you and steer you while developing your skills. What you're trying, and hopefully what people understand about walkthroughs, is you're trying to build a relationship with the client, and at the same time you're trying to understand and get something out of it. So if this is your first time leading a walkthrough, you have to spend that time to plan for it. Advanced planning leads to success. And also you have to be willing to network and be able to pull in people from your team in instances where you might need a little bit of help.
So what are some of the technical difficulties you've encountered during a virtual meeting, and how have you managed those?
Okay. Yeah, I have encountered quite a bit with my 5 years experience. The first one is always bad Wi-Fi connections. And there's always that one person who doesn't want to use the mute button. Like,
We're all
let me,
familiar with that. Yep.
here's the mute button. Let me introduce you to it. Right? So audio difficulties. And then at times it's difficult to know, especially when you're doing a video call, when there's silence, it's difficult to know if someone's thinking or someone's just frozen. So
Mm.
the key to some of these like technical difficulties is being able to build some sort of like operational resilience. So like being self-aware and understanding there might be chances that one of our contacts might have audio issues. So let me go ahead and add in a dial-in or like a conference number. And then we might have some Wi-Fi or connectivity issues. And the really cool thing about some of these collaboration tools is they allow you to perform a test before you can actually join in the meeting. So they'll do a test of your video settings, your audio settings, your microphones, and all of that. That should give you somewhat of a good baseline to know whether or not you're fully ready to jump into a virtual meeting. But yeah, I've seen a lot, but the key to solving some of them is looking ahead and anticipating and just being aware that these are some common problems. So I need to have some mitigating controls or plan Bs.
So along the same lines, you mentioned introducing people to the mute button. What are
Mhm.
some other virtual meeting etiquette tips that you've learned and would encourage others to practice?
So I have one that I really absolutely think is critical is to ask the audience not to multitask. This especially when you're having a meeting with maybe more than 10 people, certainly not every one of them is going to be able to be leading or talking through the meeting and actively participating. So for the ones that are typically what we call optional invites, I would just go ahead before the meeting, ask everyone to stop multitasking, or if they can't help it, maybe held off of responding emails right now till we get through this meeting. Another one is maybe ask them to turn off their cell phones. If they're not big fans of the mute button, then anytime they get a call, the entire conference will hear their ringtone. So just ask everyone to turn off their phones. Like you said, mute, introduce everyone to the mute button, and ask if you can ask the audience in a polite way not to multitask. That will be great, as everyone will be actively participating, and you're not going to have distractions of people asking, I'm sorry, I didn't get what you were saying, or maybe. And I find that, hey, I was on mute, I'm sorry. I find that to be a bit of a cop out when people like weren't really paying attention. So always avoid multitasking. It feels like, hey, I can respond to a couple of emails and actively listen, but that is not the way to go. No one, multitasking is a myth. Let's just focus on one thing.
These were really great tips. Julie, thank you so much for your time and insight today. And we will see everyone next time on CyBARR Chats.